Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. This week, I'm happy to welcome my friend Ryan Caldera to the podcast. Ryan is the co-host of the podcast You Don't Even Know, which is a relatively new podcast that he hosts with Alexis, and it is about discovering hidden wonders, then promptly wishing you could forget them. It's a great podcast and do a lot of fun topics, and they're a lot of fun to listen to. So I definitely recommend going to check them out. Ryan also happens to be a pretty big watch enthusiast. So we had him on to talk about watches, about collecting watches, about what that means to him, the distinction between collector and enthusiast. We get into a few of these subjects here and go over some of the watches that he owns and wears and uses, a little bit of history on some of the Rolex watches that he's found inspiring and that have kind of cast the die for him as a collector today. So we also talk a little bit about mechanical keyboards. He's also into mechanical keyboards as well, which is another kind of deep rabbit hole that he's kind of standing at the precipice of. So we go into that direction a little bit as well. It's a really fun discussion, and I'm really appreciative of Ryan for giving me some of his time. Next time we will get Alexis on as well, who, as I understand it, is also into watches a bit as well. So with that, let's jump into this week's episode with Ryan Caldera. Ryan Caldera, welcome to the Deep Track Podcast. Thanks for joining me today, my friend.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat, honestly. I'm so excited.
Well, I
Uh,
really appreciate you making time for me. We're going to talk about a lot of cool things today. Some watches, maybe some coffee, mechanical keyboards.
cool. Yeah.
We'll see where the conversations take us a little bit. But Ryan, maybe introduce yourself a little bit. You have a pretty awesome podcast that's also relatively new, as I understand it. Maybe tell us who you are and what your podcast is about.
Oh yeah. My partner and I, Alexis, have a podcast. It's called You Don't Even Know, where it's kind of like a celebration of falling into rabbit holes on the internet, something that I think as watch collectors are familiar with, or
Yes.
just, anybody interested in kind of anything, you can pretty easily fall down those rabbit holes. And so that's what we do. We pick like things that are probably pretty well known, and then just go a little further and find interesting facts and hopefully educate people on some of those things. And really, the goal is for people to kind of get into it a little bit more on their own. It's
Yeah.
sort of like to spark interest in something.
Yeah.
And it's such a blast to do. Alexis is just so funny and smart and uh, creative with that stuff. You kind of drew the short straw by getting me here today.
We'll save her for when we hit the big time.
Yeah,
Get her on.
yeah,
No, the podcast is a really cool idea, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. You Don't Even Know, also a great
yeah.
name as
Thank
well.
you.
And I, how you described it, that's kind of what I really enjoy, and that's kind of what drives me in other enthusiast spaces. I feel like when the hook is first set in something interesting, like those first kind of like few months or the first kind of initial period of learning, you can't replicate that down the line, right? Like once you're
Yeah,
into it and you're nerdy, you know all the stuff, like it's okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You try to remember, and I even have watches sometimes that I will wear that are older watches that remind me of that feeling of like when I first got into this space or when it first started to really get pulled in, that feeling of excitement there.
totally. Yeah,
And I know you guys explore a lot of different concepts there that it's like, well, here's something that we think is interesting enough that could set that hook. And then it's going to pull you in and it's going to do what
yeah,
it's going to
yeah,
do. And,
absolutely.
or maybe it's not, but at least it's like this weird thing that you can take a closer look at, which is a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, I'm so glad that that's like what you take from it, because that's one of the things I hope people say about it when they're listening. And you mentioned our show is pretty new and our audience is small, but that gives us a lot of opportunity to engage with our audience like on a one-on-one level.
Hmm.
And it's so much fun when people will like message me or something and say, I had no idea about this.
Yeah.
And now I'm learning about all these really cool things that are related to it. And like I think in some of the episodes we say that we're open to suggestions for people, and I love it. I absolutely love it when people will reach out and say, "Hey, can you do an episode on this?" Because
Yeah.
it's so fun to one see something that we didn't think of, and then it's like what you said, like, oh wow, this is really cool.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
get that feeling all over again, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's a fun feeling. And you and I though we've got together because you are a watch enthusiast,
Yeah.
Ryan. So which we'll get into before we go down too much further down the route. What are you wearing on your wrist today, Ryan?
So okay, this is my first ever watch check, and
Okay.
I thought about this.
Yeah.
Now, I'm wearing my Sea Dweller 126600
Okay.
because it is the one that I've been wearing the most in the last year or so. I decided not to get cute with it today.
Okay. Okay. Love it.
It's so comfortable and awesome. I know like it's on the bigger side, but I just love it so much. And I have it on the bracelet, and it's like the most comfortable bracelet I have. And it's just awesome.
Yeah, it's a 43 millimeters. It's definitely not a small watch, but I think Rolex does a really good job of balancing out the heft of their watches by how they attach the bracelet, like it's to the
Yep.
dial of one of these things, which we hadn't seen since the 70s. Of course, a red line of text on the dial. The Sea Dweller, of course, famously had two lines of red text on the dial, except for the prototype early versions, which are exceedingly rare, the single red Sea Dwellers. But of course, the Submariner date, when it first got the date, also did the Submariner in red up until about the 4 million mark in their serial numbers. These transitioned over to the white, 1680. But this was a thing that I think people associate with vintage Rolex, and for them to bring it back in such an overt
Yeah,
way, I found really interesting. And that was kind of like the first thing that clued me into that Rolex is really starting to maybe pay attention to how they like their past, some of their roots, and try to reconnect some of their modern watches
absolutely.
with those roots. So not only that, they brought back a few years later the 36 millimeter Explorer,
Yep.
and then they slimmed out the lug of the Submariner, of course. The Daytona, they made some changes that kind of harken back to some of the older ones. So I like
Yeah.
seeing this trend, and I think people will look back at like the last 10 years and kind of see that as a strange transitional period for Rolex. But anyway, sorry to go like too deep, but
No,
that particular reference I find really interesting. And how long have you had it?
I've had it for actually I'm coming up on a year at the end of April.
Okay. Do you what do you
Yeah.
like is did you
So
buy
it's
it from an AD?
I did, yeah. So it's the Mark II.
Okay. So
Um,
you know where I'm going with this? Like this, what makes this watch so interesting is the when it first got the 32 series movement, and all of those watches got a little crown between the Swiss and
yeah,
the maid at the bottom of the dial. The very first production run of this reference did not get that,
yeah.
which is one of those like it doesn't mean anything, whatever. But I think that's one of those things that in like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, you'll look back on, and that will
Yeah.
be like one of those weird, fun details that people are like, "What's up with this?" you know?
Dude, you are speaking to exactly why I love this hobby so much. And like, and not to like keep talking about myself and my podcast, but like that's the idea of the podcast too. It's
Yeah.
these little tiny like details that really don't mean anything at all.
Yeah.
Like, who cares about the crown between Swiss and maid, right? I do. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And the
yeah,
history behind the red text and all of that stuff, I geek out over it so hard. And it makes these things so interesting every day. And
it
I,
does.
I
Yeah,
also think I'm maybe a little bit of a romantic with this kinds of stuff too. Just the history
yeah,
and what it meant back then versus what it means now and what it means to bring it back. Like, I mean, you mentioned the Daytona when they did the anniversary one, the impossible one to get.
yeah. The
Um,
Le Mans.
the little hints of the Paul Newman stuff that they
Yeah,
put into it is
yeah,
just so interesting. And it's like if you know, you know. And
Yeah, that's true. They did a great job with that watch.
yeah,
I think and I wish they had done it in steel and made a whole bunch of
yeah,
them so
yeah,
people could get
totally.
them. I think that would be great. No, I'm with you. I like nerding out on that kind of stuff too. And I know there are a lot of watch enthusiasts that, hear these kinds of things and their eyes roll into the back of their head. And like a part of me gets like, yeah, I get it. But there are certain things that I really enjoy kind of nerding out over and the history of. And it's not like we need these things anymore these days, so it has to be about something else. So these are kind of like
Absolutely.
the fun details that I find myself kind of, um, I don't know, like trying to sink my teeth in. And when I first got into this hobby ages ago, like I would spend, I mean, all night looking through the vintage Rolex forums, through old collectors that had, detailed out weird little details. And yeah, I really enjoy jumping into it on in that level, and it's part of what makes it fun for me. Even though at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you've got these, modern Rolexes, what people call them, what they will, or whatever, and I get it, but I don't necessarily identify with most of that. Like I know what
Mhm.
parts really get me excited, and that's the stuff that I identify with. So I do it for my reasons, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And on
totally.
that note, I'm wearing something in a slightly similar vein. I'm wearing a 14060, the thick lug 40 millimeter Submariner, and this is a
Nice.
Submariner. This is one that I think in a few generations' time, people could look back at and be like, that was kind of a weird reference. So,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
Can
I
I
don't
ask you a
like.
question about that?
Yeah, of course.
Where are you at with the Cyclops?
So that's I don't mind the Cyclops at
Yeah.
all. I like it's interesting that you brought that up because also the watch that you're wearing is the first watch, the first Sea Dweller to put a
Yeah.
Cyclops on
Yeah.
on the crystal, which was kind of like a weird thing. And I feel like
Very polarizing.
it is very polarizing, but I think
Yeah.
it's part of the look that a lot of people like instantly recognize from
Hmm.
about Rolex, especially when you think about the GMTs, which all have had it so like throughout its lifespan. It's just one of those things that it does serve a practical function, and
Yeah.
it not only that, like it's part of the look now that people like identify with. But I will say, like when it comes to Submariners, I probably prefer the dateless Submariners, so
Mhm.
that it's not that I have anything against the Cyclops, it's more just the symmetry of the dial. But I
Yeah,
also have a
totally.
GMT, and that has the date and the Cyclops on it, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it would be fun to take it off and see what it looks like. I know some people do that. What about you? Does your crystal still have the Cyclops, or have you taken it off? Do you like it
No,
there? Do you prefer it
I
there?
am I'm firmly in the I love the Cyclops camp.
Okay. Okay.
Firmly. Yeah,
Is it
and
because you
you
have
just
like poor eyesight, or you just like the look of it?
I think it's one of those hallmarks that
Yeah.
it's something that I adore. It's very similar to the way, like, because I had an uncle who had a Datejust, and
Mhm.
I didn't know that it was a Datejust. I just saw this two-tone watch on his wrist, and then I could see the date a little bit better from where I was,
Sure. Hmm.
and I was
Yeah.
about like waist high, and so his wrist was about eye level to me. That's what I remember, and it's just so quintessential, I think is maybe the right word for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's
And
interesting.
it's just,
It like
yeah,
left
it's
an
to
imprint
that
on you.
romantic part again
Yeah.
that I love about it.
Do you remember what is that what kind of first set off your curiosity around watches?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had a grandfather who had a moon phase. I don't even know what kind of watch it was, but I know that it had a moon phase on it.
Hmm.
And just being obsessed with what they were wearing.
Oh, really?
And like it felt kind of odd as a kid too, because I didn't ever ask them, like, hey, show it to me. I would just kind of look at it from a distance and just admire. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We all have moments that kind of imprint on us like that. We might not know it at the time, but they are responsible for kind of pulling us into these directions, or it kind of piques a curiosity that you maybe store away for 10 years or 5 years or whatever
Yeah.
before you kind of come back to it. But it's there, and it's kind of has a part of shaping, I don't know, I guess your experience around these things in the long run.
Yeah.
If you are still
Absolutely.
like it's still something that influences, a watch that you buy and like what you appreciate about it, like that one
Absolutely.
formational experience, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
There. So when did you start like collect? Do you consider yourself a watch collector or just an enthusiast that like has some watches and wears them, or where do you fall here?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I would probably say I'm a collector because I have a watch box that I don't have enough space for all my watches.
Sure. Yeah.
And I have a little list on my phone of ones that I eventually want to get. But I think I'm also an enthusiast. I think that there's a distinction in those terms, at
Yeah.
least that I put in those terms, because the reason why I collect is because I'm enthusiastic about the watch, some element of the watch, or the brand heritage or something like that. Yeah, so that's a real important element to help me decide where I'm going to put my money.
Mm,
Does that make
okay.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. So you're not thinking about like is this an investment grade watch or what's like do you think about
Yeah,
if I'm gonna buy this watch like it's got to get used and
absolutely.
do you have any like not rules but kind of like this is what guides like how I think about the watches that I add to my collection that you ultimately add to your
Totally.
collection, like do they all fit the same, like are they all kind of like hardcore dive watches or is that an anomaly in your collection?
Yeah, well, I feel like it's maybe a little bit more spread out at the moment. But I think about how am I going to wear this? Is it going to suit? I'm a very like jeans and t-shirt guy.
Yeah,
I have an old Jeep. I ride a motorcycle, and so I want something that fits that sort of lifestyle, I guess. And
yeah,
because it's an old Jeep, I'm always fixing it, and so I gotta wear something that I don't care about scratching or dinging up or something like that.
yeah.
Um, and so I picture myself maybe wearing the thing before I have it to see if that makes sense.
Mm,
Um, there aren't, I mean, I don't, everything on my list doesn't neatly fall into that um, sort of requirement,
hmm.
but that is where I start for sure.
Okay.
Um, like I have a black plate, excuse me, Black Bay chronograph,
Hmm.
but it's a two-tone,
Okay.
mostly because it's kind of outside of my usual interests,
Yep.
but two-tone from a very early age really stuck out to me. And the Black Bay chrono is just so beefy, you can do anything with it.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I give that a lot of consideration when I'm thinking about what goes next. The one that is on my list right now at the very top of it is a Cartier Santos.
Ah, okay.
And
Okay.
that's an interesting one because, if you look on the internet, everybody says it's a scratch magnet, right?
Yeah.
The shiny polished bezel gets a scratch as soon as you walk out of the store with it.
Yeah.
But I ran into a guy who had a Santos, and he told me he had it for like 20 years or something like that. And it's all scratched up and it looks gorgeous. He says, I do everything in it. I
Yeah.
go swimming in it. I do yard work in it, everything. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And he's wearing it, he's walking around an outdoor mall, and I just happened to spot his wrist. I was like, hey, nice Santos. And he stopped and wanted to talk to me. But yeah, it's something about a watch that can show that it's lived.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so cool to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that about a lot of watches, especially ones that have some polished bits here and there, which I'm generally not a huge fan of, I suppose. But I do have a few watches with a polished center link. The GMT that I mentioned before, the new IWC Engineer with the Aqua dial. That's the only one that has a polished center link. I to me, it's kind of like a challenge of
Yeah.
well, use it, and then it
Right.
starts to kind of like pick up a little bits of wear here and there, and then it doesn't seem as flashy like after a while.
Totally.
So, yeah, it's one of those things that I know it's kind of polarizing, but the
Yeah.
Santos like leans into it even further, right? Because what is it? Like it started life as the pilot's watch, and now it's like it's its own, like it doesn't like fit neatly into any genre or anything like that. It just kind of
Yeah.
is what it is, right? And it looks great
Yeah,
with a lot of
totally.
different things. So I love seeing people exactly like this guy who just wear it whatever, yeah, dress it up,
Yeah.
dress it down, go swim in it, do all that kind of stuff. And then it's just gonna pick up all that life and all those experiences in it. And
Hmm.
that's when watches really start to like take on new meaning to us.
Yeah.
And I'm always envious of people, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, that just have like just the one watch, and that's just all they wear all day every day, and then people start to, you know the people around you, your loved ones, your kids, your spouse, whatever, like starts to identify that watch with you. And since I've got a bunch of watches, like I always wonder, like, what does my son think about? Like, what watch will he kind of picture when he thinks of me, like as he's
Hmm.
older? Or will that just be, I don't know, like fuzzy because I'm always wearing something different. So he won't really equate any of those watches with me at all. Like
Yeah.
but like if you're just this one watch person, people like know that like that's a part of your identity, right? Like especially if
Yeah.
you're rocking like a Santos or something like that, like it's such
Right.
a unique thing and people would be like, "Oh, that's the guy." Yeah, he always wore the Santos and it looked great. And like I'm kind
Yeah,
of
man.
envious of that a little bit. So you got kids
Absolutely.
too,
Me
right? So
too.
like do you think about this stuff?
All the time. I mean, and I'm similarly just as envious of the people that can do one watch and that's it. And
Yeah.
I mentioned my grandfather and my uncle, one watch guys.
One watch
That's
guys.
what I identify. Like when I picture them, that is what I picture as well. Like what they're wearing on their wrist.
Yeah.
And I have two kids, and I think about like what you mentioned all the time. Like I wonder if it's even gonna occur to them, and if it does, what is that gonna be? Or
Yeah.
is it gonna be like dad's a watch guy and he wears something different all the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really, and speaking again to that like romantic approach that I have to these things, I really wish I could be a one watch guy. I mean, I kind of thought for a little bit that I could be with the Sea Dweller.
Hmm.
I mean, in the last year, I almost have been, but I don't know. There's just so many other interesting things that I can't take my attention off of.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
it's so much fun, and I think there's probably a pretty good balance that I'm starting to strike, at least at the moment, with being interested and still being able to collect and be enthusiastic about other ones, but still have like my go-to.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. 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 I know. I try to kind of narrow that into like, when I go to the park to play football with my kid, I usually have the same watch on, or when I travel with him, I'll always have the same watch on or something like that. It at least gets
Yeah.
it part of it. But yeah, I know we're kind of spoiled for choice. I have a feeling that our the tastes and watches that we enjoy is probably has a lot of overlap in it.
Yeah.
So we're completely spoiled with some pretty awesome watches that are coming out, seemingly like left and right these days. Like it's hard to
Yeah.
keep track. Like it's already been a busy year this year, and we haven't even gotten to watches and wonders yet.
I
And,
know.
and
I
there's
was
been
thinking
some like
that too.
straight up bangers released this year
Yeah.
already. So,
Yeah.
which we should talk about. What watch has like won the year so far for you? Even just in the past week, we've had some pretty awesome watches released. The White
Yep.
Dial Speedmaster, some
Yeah.
new Prospects divers from Seiko. Um, yeah, which of these watches has kind of caught your eye?
Well, so if we're going back to, well, I'll just say it is the IWC on Janor. When that
Okay.
one came out,
Yeah.
that one buried itself into my brain. I
Yeah.
love that thing. That is so cool looking. I have not got a chance to see it in real life,
Okay.
but boy, the pictures on the internet look awesome. And
Yeah.
just the way that they did the dial, the the shape of the integrated bracelet and
Yeah.
the way that it marries with the case is just, it looks awesome to me. It's near
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, they did a great job with that watch. So what do you have a dial color that you like, or would you go like the titanium route and just go all gray?
So, oh, this is another thing we can get into if you want. I am not on board with titanium too much.
Ah, you're okay. I've come across your type before. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
This could be our like differentiation thing here. Um, so yeah, okay. Tell me about this. Like, when did
Yeah.
you like? Is this something that you just have always felt this way, or is it something that you started to realize, like, oh, there's a lot of these popular watches that are titanium. You try one out, and you're just like, it's not quite for me.
Yeah, I love the idea of it for sure. It's just when I start to wear when I put one on, I don't get the same feeling that I do
Okay.
when I put on a stainless steel something
Yeah.
or like a gold something or two-tone something.
Yeah.
It just and yeah, I've heard other people talk about this and it's a weight issue
Yeah.
most of the time, right? If it's heavier, it's better quality.
Sure.
I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's I I like to tell myself I don't think that because I know better,
It's
but there's just something sort of like instinctual in me that's like, nope, you don't like that.
yeah.
And I love the look of the Pelagos 39. Love it. I
Yeah.
think that is a beautiful, and that if we're talking about one watch that you would wear every day, that could easily be one.
Yeah.
But titanium, man,
It's
I
just
don't know.
titanium. All those Pelagos watches, right?
Yeah,
It's even the FXD, which the FXD and the Pelagos 39 are two watches that I wear like quite often when I'm
yeah,
out and about. And I mentioned like going to the park with my kid or something, like 99 times out of 100, like it's gonna be one of those two watches that's on my wrist,
yeah.
and they're all banged around and all that kind of stuff, and which I like. Like, I definitely get it. I can certainly appreciate when I put on like a very lightweight watch but it
Mhm.
can cross over into a realm of like it's almost disconcerting how light a watch can be, or
Yeah.
thin, or anything like that. So, and what's the line from Snatch when he's trying to buy the gun from the guy and he's like, you can tell the weight, its quality. Plus, if
Oh,
it doesn't
yep.
work, you can always
Uh-huh.
hit him with it.
And you can hit him with it. Yeah, I love that movie and that line especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. I'm that
Yep.
guy.
You're that guy. You're the guy that's saying that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So I sense that like it can be frustrating then for you if it, just like people who like titanium, and even people who, which I think I did on the last podcast, speculated that Rolex might go use titanium in the Sea Dweller
Yeah.
collection, is a place that it would make a lot of sense to use it, or like
Mhm.
an Explorer 2 or something like that. So do you see watches that you like the Pelagos 39, and then you're just like bummed because, well, it's titanium, and like you feel strongly enough about it that you would not buy a watch that you otherwise really like because it is titanium.
Oh man, that's another really great question. I am such a huge fan of the Explorer 2. To me, that one makes the most sense to do titanium next,
Hmm.
just because it's really, and I've heard this elsewhere as well. Like the Explorer 2 is sort of the last great tool watch, I think, in Rolex's lineup.
Yeah. Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least that's an idea that I would agree with.
Yeah.
And so titanium, of course, makes sense for that.
Yeah.
Um, I I think if they did the Explorer 2 in titanium, I'd still probably want it.
You still
That
want it.
that would be the one that would
Yeah.
give me to the dark side.
Because I feel like there's certain watches that they still have enough heft that they still like the Ploprof, for instance, which they make in titanium. It's still like a pretty hefty watch. It just
Yeah.
mitigates like some of that heft. I feel like the Explorer 2 could be the same, but having handled the titanium Yachtmaster last year at Watches and Wonders, that was very light.
Really.
Like it surprised me how light it was. So I would imagine it would probably follow the same route, and it would maybe be 60 grams or something like that, and they would really lean
Yeah.
into it. But but the watch itself is still like, it's not small. So, I don't know like what it would feel like wearing around for like a week. I'm curious about that. I'd love to get some
Yeah.
more time with the titanium Yachtmaster. I really like that watch, even though I'm not overly fond of the Yachtmaster range.
Uh-huh.
Something about the name. I just cannot quite.
Same.
I can't.
Same, dude. I thought it was an odd choice to do in titanium. that one
Yeah,
of
it's
all.
almost like them putting their toes in the water with it, right?
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
like I haven't seen pretty much any make it into the market. Like I don't know if if they're just not making many of them or they're just difficult to make and finish to the level that they need it to be. I don't know what the story is, but surely they're going to use it somewhere else, right?
I would have to believe they would. Yeah. It doesn't make a ton of sense to stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So, all right. So you like kind of you're not afraid to go into the larger end of things and have a little bit of heft
Right.
on the
Yeah.
wrist. This is shaped a part of how you collect. But I know you're also into like into design, like into the
Yeah.
aesthetics
So,
of things, to the design
yep.
structure of these things. How does that influence how you think about watches?
Well, it's and we talked about it earlier about the details in the sea dweller, the red text, and all that stuff. So when I am looking at something, I'm looking at sort of the reasons behind the design or
Mm,
something like that. Like for
mm,
example, I have a Laurier Hyperion,
mm-hmm.
the first version of it. And it's a GMT with a Pepsi style bezel. And really like the whole company's kind of created watches based on what do you call it? Like
It's like classic sport watch DNA that they're able
yeah,
to kind of like tap
exactly, yeah.
into. And yeah, Lauren
Mhm.
Lorenzo do a great job of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they make it their own. And
Yeah.
so for the Hyperion, for example, it's not red and blue. It's like a burgundy and sort of purpley color. They do two different colors of lume,
Mm,
um, one on the bezel, one on the dial. Just really subtle details that make it their own. But you can see kind of what they're sort of paying tribute to
yeah.
in all of their things.
Yeah.
Um, and that I mean, aside, I have the one with the soap prod movement in it, so it's crazy thin.
Mm,
It wears like a dream.
mm,
And yeah, it's just those little kind of small design details that make me attracted to something. Or it can even be like quirkiness.
yeah. Yeah.
Like my second favorite watch is probably my Black Bay 36.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have the smiley dial.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when it was when it was that version, that was the only version you can get. It was cool and simple on its own. Now
Mm,
that they've updated it and they've gotten rid of the smiley and they've gotten rid of the long crown tube, the old one looks a little more quirky, right? And a
yeah.
little stranger. And it made me love it even more for a weird reason. It's those kinds of things um that just make me want to look at it without
Yeah.
looking to see what time it is.
Yeah, I love watches that have quirks that are odd features like that that you notice that maybe don't take away from the whole experience or like the experience as a whole, but they add another dimension there, I think, over the long run, that you really kind of appreciate and it feels like there's always something new to discover with it, like every time you look at them
Totally.
almost. And I've got a lot of watches that I think are really funky. I love the kind of neo vintage tool watches that have make really strange design choices, and even watches like modern ones, like the FXD that I mentioned, with the fixed lug case. Like that's a weird thing, and
Yeah.
you know, like the fully indexed bezel that they made for the Marine Nationale, and it turns both ways and it counts
Yeah.
down like that's weird stuff, and I
Uh-huh.
love that adds all this like kind of weird personality to it. And I feel like a lot of watches really kind of it's you play it safe. And again, we're spoiled for choices for like great tool watches and all that kind of stuff, and there's tons of them out there, but I think you really run the risk of becoming like almost too generic by making sport watches that are just kind of too not perfect, but there's nothing like interesting about them. Like I think
Yeah.
Laurier is a great example of a brand that brings their own kind of distinguishing components to it. And Lauren Lorenzo, I know think in great detail about how they go about some of these designs or the proportions of small things, and it comes off like you can feel it. Like a Laurier watch feels like a Laurier watch, the design, or like a Ferrer watch has really weird design,
Yeah.
strange, not weird, not in a bad way, but it's definitely peculiar, and
Uh-huh.
it's like a fingerprint for that brand. How they
Yeah.
bring colors together, how they use shapes, or how they shape their cases. It could be a lot of different things, or if it has like a weird function to it, or something that's unexpected, like the Zinn Hydro watches that are filled with oil. Like that's weird.
Yeah.
Like what? That's
So
that's so
weird,
weird.
but so
Like I would
cool.
love Tudor to release an oil-filled Pelagos. I think
Yeah.
that'd be really cool. Like push it over the top of like what? That's funky.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like in the long run, there are so many of these things. Like there has to be something that like sets it apart in a way that is like unique to that brand or the vision of the designer or whatever it is, that kind of
Hmm.
sets it apart. And that's where I feel like the kind of mid to late '90s era has a lot of that. Like they look a bit of their era, but they're so kind of unique and strange these days. And it's the same with like
Yeah.
fashion and styles, right? I don't know.
Oh
Like
yeah,
it's
totally.
there has to be something else there that you
Yeah.
notice. Otherwise, because if it's like perfectly inoffensive and nobody has a bad thing to say about it, then it's probably like kind of boring, right?
Uh-huh.
And
You know what, dude? I was kind of excited to get your thoughts on this. And speaking exactly to that is the Speedmaster, the Moonwatch.
yeah, yeah.
I think that is so boring.
Okay, yeah.
I am I and the re actually Alexis helped me break this down. She
Okay.
asked me what specifically makes it boring to me. And I started talking about it and I came to the realization and she witnessed it like it might be the perfect watch. Just the way that it's laid out, the size of it, the way that it wears compared to its size, it could be very close to perfect. And that's what's so boring about it to me.
Okay,
Does that
okay.
make sense? And I
Yeah.
feel like weird and a little bit guilty for saying that, especially out in public, but that's, yeah, it just never really grabbed me the way that it has other people
Yeah.
and,
Yeah,
and the way that other watches have grabbed me before.
that's it takes it takes comfort in your own like skin and understanding like of your experience in this hobby to be able to admit that okay, here's a watch that is kind of like universally lauded, but I just don't feel I have any emotion toward it. And there's plenty of watches that I feel that way about. And the Speedmaster is, of course, the watch that everyone says, oh, everyone needs a Speedmaster in their collection. And
Yeah,
I'm always the first to like, even though I own one, I was like, no, you don't. Like, it's not for everybody, and not everybody has to like it. And
yeah,
I don't want it to be that way because then it's exactly what I said. It's yeah, everybody kind of likes it. It's perfectly
yeah.
inoffensive. You
Uh-huh.
know, and for me, like I like the history of it, of course, and that's a whole other fun thing to research. And but yeah, the watch itself is relatively bare bones. What I like about it is the case, actually. The twisted lug design of the Speedmaster
Sure.
Professional, I think
Yeah.
is interesting, and I think it's one of those watches that has the ability to wear really well, like way better than you might think just by looking at the measurements on the page. And it's always
Hmm.
the example that I hold up of people that are scared to wear watches like over 40 millimeters or something. I'm like, it has nothing to do with the numbers like within a certain range. Like it has everything to do with wearability and how it all comes together on your wrist. And that can
Absolutely.
that can have to do with things like how the weight is distributed because of the bracelet, or how the
Yep.
lugs rest on your, or the case back if it kind of goes into the nook of your wrist, and is the case wall designed thoughtfully. There are a lot of other things that watch does really well. I
Hmm.
think that make it I don't know, accessible or approachable. And of course, it's got this great history that everyone knows and loves. So, like, all those things add up to, like, oh, yeah, it's a watch that everybody has to have. But I think you're probably right. There is nothing really wrong with it, but there's nothing all that exciting about just the base Speedmaster Professional either. Like, it's very
Yeah.
straightforward. Um, yeah, it doesn't elicit like an emotional response from me. It's just a watch that,
Hmm.
like, I like. And
Yeah.
and I've had plenty over the years, and I feel like I've always had one in the collection, and I haven't really thought about it. And what I love most about the new one is the bracelet, the tapering bracelet on the new one. I think is great. And then the white dial one that just came out, I think looks also really nice. I
Yeah.
suppose, but I don't feel strongly enough about it to where I'm like, I need to like get rid of this and get rid of that and get this in my collection like ASAP. It's just
Uh-huh.
interesting. And I will say about the white dial. I think Omega did it really well with the like all black hour markers and black hands. I notice a lot of white
Yeah.
dials, they'll go like fully polished hour markers. And
Uh-huh.
I don't know, like if you're gonna go white, you gotta just like lean into it and like make the high contrast with the black accents. So does the white make it any more exciting to you, or do you still feel the same about even the white dial? Like it's just
It
kind of
actually does. When I saw it when it was when they released it, and I saw all the pictures, I was like, man, this might do it for me. This might be the one that I need to get because it just made it unsafe enough,
yeah,
I guess,
yeah.
that I looked harder. And the applied logo, applied indices, things that are not on the traditional Moonwatch.
Yeah.
Um, just I really dig. I think that is a super cool one. And I like that they really didn't change anything else about it other than the dial. They kept the bracelet the same, the clasp is the same,
Yeah.
dimensions are the same as far
Hmm.
as I know. The
Yeah.
only small difference that I've seen, aside from the color, of course, is there's a tiny weight difference, which is like gonna be nothing.
Yeah.
But otherwise it's, I mean, same movement even.
Yeah.
I really like that one a lot.
Yeah, I like it as well. I'm keen to see it in person. My feeling is that it's a watch that you'll need to see. Like
Yeah.
pictures and all that kind of stuff. It's one thing, but and there's some good live pictures on Vertello and Monochrome. The Dutch guys, I think, they got some nice hands-on shots of that. I'll leave a link to that down below for anyone curious. But yeah, I it does feel slightly less safe. Like the Black Dial Speedmaster is just kind of like the tie to history. Like it hasn't
Mhm.
really changed all that much since 1957, like in little small ways, but you know, especially like since the 60s when that template was set, it's kind of it
Yeah.
hasn't really changed at all. Like it's this totally timeless thing. It looks
Yeah.
great, it's perfectly inoffensive, it's usable. But yeah, there's nothing like all that exciting about it unless you like really get into like the space nerdy stuff and you get into to all that. But then, there are plenty of vintage Speedmasters that are you could be had for less than the price of a new one as
Mhm.
well. So there's fertile ground there, I think, for collectors and enthusiasts to explore without having to feel like they have to jump into like the newest and the latest and greatest and decide if they like the
Absolutely.
Speedmaster, which I think is a cool thing. So,
Yeah.
um, hmm,
I think there's a ton of value in that too. I mean, and I I don't want to make it sound like I don't appreciate the history and stuff because I mean, we were talking about it. Those are things that I really love,
yeah,
and I totally see the value in that watch and how they basically nailed it, and then they
didn't
committed
change
to
it.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
there's something so cool about that too.
yeah,
Um, that
yeah.
I really can appreciate. And I think maybe it's that coupled with the new white that really just brings it together for my taste.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I get on board with that. All right. Before I let you go, I want to talk about mechanical keyboard stuff because I think that's another thing that we have in
Yeah.
common. That
Yeah.
you are an enthusiast, a mechanical keyboard enthusiast. So, how did this happen for you? Like, how did you discover that this was a thing, and how did you get pulled into it?
Yeah. Okay. So I am still like a baby enthusiast.
Okay.
But it really came about because one of my good friends, actually, if anyone out there listens to the show, they might hear us talk about uh, our listener Paul, number one fan Paul. He is
Shout out,
my
Paul.
friend in real life, and he is way into mechanical keyboards and artisan keycaps.
Yeah.
And so he shares a lot of stuff with me, like, hey, I just picked this up. This one's coming. I'm selling this one. And that was my sort of entry point into that world was the artisan caps because of
Okay.
the
Yeah.
art
Yeah.
that goes into them is so interesting and detailed. And I mean, like, what we've been talking about this whole time, it's the details.
Yeah.
And and then, of course, once you're there, you get into the keyboards and all the customizations that you can do with like base plates and switches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's such a cool rabbit hole to fall into.
It's a deep rabbit hole
Yeah.
as well. All right. So have you like made the leap and built your first keyboard yet?
Not yet. So I'm
Okay.
I'm actually every once in a while I'll check in with Paul and see like what's new out there because he has a few, and I'm I I'm a little scared, honestly, to
Sure.
jump into it because
Yeah.
I know that it's going to be something that I'll get lost in.
Yeah.
So for now, I've got a few artisans. I've got one on the way,
Okay.
and I have a little display box. They're just so fun to look at.
Okay.
And yeah, but I do plan on getting one pretty soon here. I really want to figure out what color scheme and layout that I want
Mm-hmm.
to sort of match what I've got as far as caps go.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to do it and then have to redo it, and then I don't know. But that's also part of the fun of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose if you have a pre-existing collection of artisans, then you'd really have to think about what keycap sets they would
mhm.
work with, and obviously what profile they would need to be depending on what kind of artisans you're talking about. But a lot of
Yep.
artisans are designed with certain colorways in mind of like classic keycap sets. So I guess using them on a board that doesn't have that, you'd really have to think hard about, well, is it going to go with any of this stuff?
Yeah, yeah,
you know but and I tell people with keyboards that the keycaps is kind of like changing a watch strap. Like you can really change
definitely.
the personality of your board, and you can have 10 different sets of keycaps and change between them once a month or something like that, and it's just like having a whole new keyboard. Just like changing the strap out on a watch can really have a big make a big difference, like visually. So
Yeah,
um but the layout, that's obviously something that you can't change. So
you're
that's
right.
like where okay, do I want to go really small or 60% or TKL or like full size? Do you have any thought? Like, have you tried a few different layouts and like a few different like switch types to get a sense of, okay, I like a
Yeah.
linear switch and I like to, have a full keypad over the right, or like, are you starting to get into the ballpark there?
Yeah, so maybe you've seen these. There's like these little tester pads, and
Yeah.
it's a keyboard pad, but they just have different types of switches, and so you press the buttons, and you feel which one feels best to you. Have you seen this?
Yeah, yep, and they can
Yeah.
have different weight of the springs, and
Yeah,
they can all be tuned differently. Yeah, and I have my own
yeah,
thoughts on those things, but it's a good way to literally feel
yeah,
the
right.
difference between some of these things.
So I've done another friend has one of those, and I've messed around with it to kind of narrow down a range of switches that I like. I do like a full keyboard.
Okay,
I like
yeah,
having a number pad
like
and all
old
that.
school, full on, yeah, full
Yep.
layout, yeah, love it.
Yeah. And especially, with Pro Tools and stuff, that's kind of necessary.
Yeah,
The number pad does stuff in Pro Tools. So when
yeah,
I'm editing and things, that's kind of a necessity.
yeah. This
Um,
is a full 1800 layout, as it's referred to, with the whole kit and caboodle on there, which is great.
great.
I
Yeah.
love that layout too.
Yeah. Is there like a type or brand of keyboard that you have come to really like, or do you just kind of, well, how many
I
keys do you
I
have?
have I have I've cycled through a few dozens, a few dozen over the past probably 5 years. Yeah, I probably have four or five now. A couple of them aren't built. The two that aren't built are from a manufacturer, a TX manufacturer. So I have um, an 1800 style, and then a slightly revised 1800 style. But I use a duck keyboard now. It's the duck TCV3. It was a custom that I built quite a few years back. I don't know if Duck still runs group buys or anything like this, but he
Mhm.
back in the day had some of the more, I think, like kind of iconic keyboards, like the Duck Viper kind of brought the HHKB look with the blockers there on the 60% layouts, and then the Duck Eagle and the Jetfire. There's a few of them. I had all of these. I really liked them all, but I like the slightly compact but still full layout. I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
what you would say. So, um, but yeah, like the scene today, I feel like has changed a little bit. And I know guys like Oblatsky and Lightning Keyboards, Diego, who's out here in New York. I had him on the podcast the other month. I'll leave a link to that down below. We like really nerd out on on keyboards. He builds
Yeah.
keyboards like that's his livelihood. So he was a
Mhm.
great resource to have on. But yeah, it's but I like changing it up in like
Right.
experience. It's just again, just like the watch. Like, could I be a one
Yep.
keyboard guy? I don't know. I like
Yeah.
to, and I've got a whole totes full of different keycaps, and uh, it's crazy, but it's a lot of fun though. And then once you get into like where you can solder everything together and build the switch and get it all working and tuned exactly the way you like it, it's immensely satisfying. So,
Yeah.
but it's a
Dude,
very deep rabbit hole.
uh-huh. I listened to that episode, Diego,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
Diego was on, and it really got me pretty amped up to get more into it because I love being hands-on building something. That's kind of why I have an old Jeep and motorcycles because
yeah,
I need to tinker with them.
yeah,
And like bringing that into other hobbies, changing watch straps and stuff like that. I
yeah.
also am into Seiko modding.
Oh,
So
nice. Okay, okay.
it's that same thing over
Yeah,
again.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm really excited to do it. The only apprehension is because of like how far in I will fall.
yeah. Yeah, just like watches, and I always tell people kind of be careful. Like
Yeah,
it's if you're predisposed to this kind of thing, like it can
yeah,
really eat up a lot of your time and a lot. But
totally.
it's also like underpinning it though is a great community of enthusiasts, just like watches. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
I that and that's one of the things that I love so much about the watch collecting is
yeah,
the community aspect of it.
yeah,
And the artisan cap community, they are so tight and then it feels like they know each other.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it's a small world
I
at the end of
love
the
them.
day, but
Yeah.
there's still a ton of people that are like really into it. And I think like the mechanical
Yeah.
keyboard subreddit is like massive now. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe it's a lot of people. Like it's a lot of people that are into it and getting into it still. So I'm happy to hear that you're like kind of on the precipice looking
Hmm.
in. And if you've got artisans, then you're over
Right.
you're over the line, probably, I would imagine. So it's just
Yeah.
a matter of time. So the next time we talk, we can talk about what you've what you've been building. Um,
Yeah. I'll have like five keyboards behind me
yeah, yeah, mounted like
on the
on the
wall.
wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, it's been awesome to chat with you today. Where can people go find more of you or go subscribe to your podcast? Maybe remind us what it's called and if you're on Instagram or anything like that, where can people go find you?
Yeah, so the podcast is You Don't Even Know. So you can find that on anywhere you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, all those places. And then the best way to see kind of like maybe some behind the scenes stuff or little clips and stuff is Instagram. So it's You Don't Even Know underscore pod,
Nice. Okay.
Instagram. And you can message us. I love hearing from listeners. I love hearing suggestions and what they enjoyed, maybe what we got wrong, because we get a lot of stuff wrong too.
Sure.
Um, yeah,
We all
it's
do. We're
just
only human.
yeah, and I think we try to be as transparent as we can about that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, find those two places is where you can get us.
All right. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thanks for your time. Next time we'll get Alexis on
Yeah.
as well and
Yeah.
see what happens. What
Yep.
kind of rabbit holes we
Get
can
ready.
we can go down. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. And thank you for listening to the show. A reminder that you can support the Deep Track on Patreon. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. Also, a reminder that we'll be in Switzerland covering Watches and Wonders here in just a few weeks. So get subscribed if you are not yet. That will do it for this week's episode. Until next time, take care.